Welcome to Behind the Build. I'm your host, Jonathan Jacobs. Today I have with me a gentleman I've now known for 5 or 6 years. We partnered together on a project, a beautiful project, mass timber project out in Caledon for an incredible client. A really successful project, beautiful, on a beautiful parcel of land. But I find myself right now talking about the project and not about the man sitting across from me. So today I have with me Jason Halter from Wonder Inc. And Jason, I appreciate you joining. Thanks for taking time out of your day to come over, have some lunch.
My pleasure.
Before we get further into this conversation with Jason about design, craft, and the beauty of making things well, I want to take a moment to talk about one of the companies that shares that same philosophy, Kaplan's Appliances. When we built that home in Caledon, Jason and I are referencing throughout this episode, our clients went to Kaplan's for every appliance in the house. It wasn't just a shopping trip, it was an experience. From the moment they walked into the showroom, they were guided by people who actually understand how kitchens are lived in, not just how they're sold. Every conversation was about how they cook, how they gather, how they live. Kaplan's handled every detail with precision, from coordination and delivery to on-site scheduling with our construction team. When the appliances arrived, they were set up seamlessly when the time was right. No stress, no surprises. Just a quiet confidence that comes from working with people who take pride in what they do. Now, months later, on that rural lot surrounded by beautiful trees and open air, our clients are cooking, entertaining, and enjoying that space every day with beautiful views, nature through those windows, and the appliances at their fingertips. And they've told us how much they loved working at Kaplan's. So whether you're designing or you're building or renovating and you want that same level of service, connect with me. It's Jonathan, Jonathan, at waldenhomes.ca, and I'll put you in touch with the right person at Kaplan's. Or stop by their showroom. It's on the west end of Toronto. They're family run, they've been around for generations, and they care deeply about every project, every client, just like we do. Now, let's get back to Jason. So we spoke a little bit over lunch about some of the early stages of your life that kind of got you into what you were doing. We were talking about your dad, some of the stuff that he did. So I'd like to ask and kick things off with, what got you interested in the concept of design? What sparked your passion for admiring architecture? What was it? At what age?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me, first of all.
Pleasure.
The impetus, as you mentioned, my father was a huge fan of architecture, art, all of his kind of passions, nature. My brother ended up being a scientist because my dad's interest in trees and nature, and I sort of fancied art and architecture as a kid. And I was saying earlier that we didn't have a lot of access at our early years schooling for things like design or architecture. Wasn't really sort of present so much in the formal education, even though it was great school, came up from a great place in Winnipeg. But the impetus was really sort of what was around us at home. So lots of art, lots of books, lots of discussion about design and making, and it wasn't probably till much later when I, after a first degree in history and history of art and history of mostly Western civilization and stuff, that we started getting interested in discussing more about architecture. And then slowly I migrated to an architecture program. And then, through that, there was a sort of tradition of learning how, not just how architecture was made, but how to make things, how to become a maker. And so, early days, lots of furniture, lots of speculative small scale design work. And that just sort of grew over time as a, something to learn, but that, everything is a byproduct of iterative process.
Right.
So, whatever you do, if you do it enough, you get better, you learn better techniques. And in many ways, architecture is like that, where you start somewhere and then, wherever I am 30 plus years later, I almost know how to make things.
Well, so when you were young, do you have this memory of like walking through any of those projects that your dad was involved with?
Oh
And,
yeah, yeah. We
and
were always on site. I mean, I was either on site at projects that my father was developing in Winnipeg, or as kids, we kicked around construction sites a lot. It's a place, it was a bit, you look back and everyone talks about the sort of pre-digital world of when I grew up, which would have been the 70s and 80s, I guess. But we just found not trouble, but we went to places that probably we shouldn't have, but I don't know if there were no trespassing signs as a kid, or whether there were that many signs, or whether we cared, So you just, you found stuff. And then slowly but surely, you migrate to just learning about, how things are done. And then, my father would always highlight, the then building techniques that were interesting, or what was a novel facet of some project, whether it was sort of a foundation or a caisson structure, or whatever he was fascinated with at the time, because of a project that was close to a river and relative to erosion control, or something. You just, and all that stuff just piled on itself until we found that architecture was probably a great place to continue that education and investigation.
you kind of go from that, and do you have recollection of your dad explaining plans to you when you were a kid? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's interesting because the idea of reading drawings and how we learn how to read drawings is it's become second nature, but it's not something that you're kind of initially either clear about, or that you understand facets of,
Right.
Whether it's graphic conventions or how to read space, right? Because when you're looking at a plan, for example, or a section, these are two-dimensional representations of a building that you never really see that way, but you organize your design work or conceptual work typically around plan, often on elevations through section.
Yeah.
Lots of times now, and especially because I guess we're in a world where 3D modeling and 3D or perspectival viewing is second nature to how we work.
When you care about proportion, light, and a clear connection to what's outside, the glazing system matters. The Doors builds floor-to-ceiling curtain walls that change how rooms feel to live in. They fabricate glass that can span over 20 feet high or 20 feet long and weigh up to 1.5 tons, yet installs cleanly and reads as effortless once in place. And they do curved glass, full wall systems that open homes to these expansive views of forest, ravines, or cities without visual noise. If your priority is performance, the Doors also supplies Passive House certified windows and doors, meeting modern code and comfort standards for airtightness, thermal control, and quiet. They serve Toronto and across Canada, as well as parts of the US, and we rely on them when a project calls for clarity, scale, and precision. If you want details on configurations, lead times, or how these systems integrate with the structure and envelope, email me at Jonathan, Jonathan, @waldenhomes.ca, and I'll connect you with the Doors. Now, let's get back to Jason.
When I was younger, and when I learned how first to read drawings, it would have been through my dad, and through looking at anything from Frank Lloyd Wright books to international style, like Le Corbusier was a big thing for us when we were kids. It was considered, pretty out there, even though in some cases it's also beautifully simple and organic in ways. But nonetheless, we would look at things and then start to understand that probably design had something to do with proportion and circulation, and the construction of a building with light and or conditions of grade changing, and however that was, whatever we learned and how we learned how to read drawings, that became a kind of a back of your mind second nature about when it came time to start to design, and how would you move through a space, and what do you recall from early days buildings that you would think of or ways in which space was organized. So, and I think that's a really important aspect of even, today's practice, where when you're working with clients and discussing whether it's in schematic design or pre-design or whatever stage of the project, you want to walk them through how sometimes to read plans, because not everyone does have the same acuity for understanding, the difference between, just subtleties, let's say, in design work. So yeah, all of those early days really did sort of, I guess, inadvertently inform me as a young designer. So.
And so do you have this recall of an aha moment, or was it more kind of organic over time where you had established for yourself, this is a pursuit that I want to go after? Or which way was it?
Well, I admired my father was a great guy, and he spent a lot of time with me when I was young. So I was always trying to, beyond the recollections with my father, but, in homage or in with respect for a senior figure, you want to kind of do what they do, right?
Yeah.
It sort of seems like I'll pursue that. And then, I think after going through an initial degree and looking to see what, do you want to go into law school? What do you do? What kind of grad school is there out there? I came to Toronto and by one way or another met some people who introduced me to the school, then the U of T Architecture School, now the Daniels Faculty of Architecture. And
how old were you when you moved to Toronto?
I think I was about 21.
Okay.
And so once I was introduced, it was natural. It seemed like the only thing to do. It was, I thought to myself, oh, I could do that. And it just never occurred to me that there would be anything else that, you would look into. And through architecture school, of course, it's like a springboard to so many things. Like, you don't just become an architect. You might end up in anything from film to construction, development. I know great furniture designers and great photographers. We talked about that. People who emerge through that education. It's like a general design education that really gives you a broad perspective that you didn't get otherwise. I mean, we didn't get that as I mentioned, in primary school, secondary school. I didn't have access to, design courses. And so when it finally, was available to me, it was just a great environment, great social environment. Architecture school is very, let's say, involved. In order to sort of get yourself through the program, you tend to team up with your classmates and form pretty solid bonds and figure out how to get through the grind, because it is really a grind to get through.
And it was a 5-year program at that point.
Yeah, that was a 5-year professional degree, I guess. And so you'd go through that. You go directly into practice after that. And, I joined the RAIC, I think, right after school finished, and then was going to maybe intern, but I ended up TAing for a while and working as a carpenter, helping out some friends.
Oh, cool.
Build and stuff. And because every year I'd make sure that there was one or two projects in the shop, because it had a really pretty fully built out shop for that time in the late 80s, early 90s. And would always build something for my apartment or some, appendage to my studio space or something. Right. And then by the time I was in 5th year, we were, I was helping a good friend of mine, a great mill worker, still build, reproduction furniture like Rietveld furniture or stick leaf furniture, sort of the arts and crafts stuff.
Cool. So a lot of hands-on experience.
Yeah. Like literally, milling wood through from rough to finish and building jigs and making bits and pieces and assembling and sanding and finishing. And then, I still have some zigzag chairs and a bunch of other things.
Any substantial injuries from working with your hands?
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, I still have all my digits.
I noticed that you have all your fingers,
but I did pass my thumb over a table saw at one point.
Yep.
That was a remarkable
and it's still there.
Yeah, I took the pad off, but it grew back mostly. Got a little bit of a scar there. I mean, anytime you hear about sort of furniture makers without digits, you don't think they're very good because they weren't obviously paying attention. So.
Oh yeah.
But it happens.
Or they were paying attention.
Or they were paying attention and
right?
Things happening.
Yeah. I actually can think back to shop class in junior high school.
Yeah.
And I remember from the other side of the room hearing a kid scream out.
Yep. Yeah, that's a split second you wish you could go back to.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
before that.
That kid was running to the front office. Yeah. Those things happen.
It's nasty.
Right?
Anyway, but
so I'm there's a lot of facets to this, and I know that I'm curious about, because you talk about it. You've done some furniture design. Mm-hmm. Did some carpentry. You talked before at lunch, some film. So, because it's a fairly unique opportunity through your career to be able to have all these different interests in some capacity fulfill you.
Yeah.
In a different way than the traditional way.
Well, I mean, in many ways, you're the byproduct of the moment that you graduate from. So in the, say, early 90s, I guess, as I recall, there was kind of a pretty good recession going on.
Yeah.
So, the immediate thought was, do I get a job out of school? Can I do that? Can I stay in Toronto? Where do I go?
Mm-hmm.
And, opportunities led me to things like, working as an apprentice carpenter for a while. I then got a job teaching and worked with John Schneer and Bruce Kuwabara early days. They're friends of mine who are, definitely senior figures, but friends and great colleagues to work with as a TA. And in that time, made me realize that teaching is also a really great possible venue for continued learning and honing the craft that takes decades to learn if you want to be a good architect, I suppose. And so through that, grad school came around. I took a great program with Syracuse University that was mostly in fact, the whole program was in Florence, Italy, but you spent a week or two on campus to qualify for your degree. But then we all went off to Florence, and I spent a year there, which was on the heels of a semester that the fourth year at U of Toronto would offer at the time. And that also started a whole sort of trajectory in my career where I was both, reliving the art history and the architectural history of that period. In my grad school, I came out of that, was hired as a associate early days professor at UBC. Then I did some teaching with U of T in the study abroad kind of arena. Let's say, they would invite me to go to work in Italy, and I did that for 3 or 4 years, and that sort of kicked off another sort of bunch of work that you mentioned. I worked with a really great filmmaker, photographer named Olivo Barbieri, and he's a pretty famous guy in Italy and good friend of mine. And we produced some interesting projects together that had a great kind of life of its own. And so, you follow that for a few years, and I worked again, came back and briefly worked with a couple of firms with my friend Vic Yolnkolms had a MJMA, and Dave Miller were great guys, great architects, great firm. I worked with them for a little while, and then started working with Bruce Maus for a number of years. That threw me into another arena of design, which was sort of in some cases architecturally related. We did kind of like conceptual planning or signage and wayfinding and integrative
wayfinding.
Yeah, wayfinding. That's how you find your way.
Yeah. So what does that look like?
Well, bigger buildings. You walk in, you got to know where to go, right?
Yeah.
So there can be a program of how you engage a building in the first place, how you walk in, how you understand circulation, where you're directed to, naming of spaces.
Okay.
So wayfinding is a bit like, finding your way through a larger program, whether it's institutional or educational or, whatever type of building, performative building.
Cool.
We worked with great named architects from, California and the Netherlands, and got to work directly with them and in their firms, and working in some cases in a manner where the idea was to, integrate the way that you sign a building with the architecture, so that there would be a kind of not just a sign on a wall, but, casting into a concrete, or burning out of wood, or making out of tile, or etching on glass, or, some manner of integrative work, so that you're still understanding how the building works, but also it's integrative. So that was super.
Yeah, it becomes a fixture.
Yeah. And so, and I was always fascinated with the idea of architecture as a circulatory diagram, right? Because diagramming was always a big thing. Again, probably in the pre-digital world, when we came up, we learned how to draw. We learned how to first use, pencils and technical pens. And, eventually you're going from, tech pencils on vellum to ink on mylar to some form of, a hybrid presentation formatting. And then you learn how to, draw 2 or 3 point perspectives from scratch, which were measured perspectives. I remember in second year learning with Howard Sutcliffe, who was just a genius of a draft person and a really nice guy.
Yeah.
Who came and taught us how to construct perspectives. And all of a sudden, every project you were designing, you were now thinking also in 3D. And it's funny because, and I come back to the idea of diagramming, which is a critical element for understanding how kind of your bubble diagram, if that's how you design, or, how buildings take form, like how do you think
right
in terms of coming back to that understanding of, do you know how plans work and how, light affects architecture, or how proportions are working. And then you kind of develop intention through diagramming, and then through that comes circulation and relationships to the site and all of the things that we do. So those were really important things to not just understand, but to be able to demonstrate. Like you think it comes through your hand and through your pencil or your pen and onto some graphic medium. And to the extent that you need to be, clear about how you communicate to, whether it's a client or a contractor or a friend or a colleague, right? The better able you are to describe that, the more the idea can flourish, right? Or change or become apparent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a real big difference between what I learned as a young, let's say, drafts person to later on learning, with no diss to the wild quality of how we construct drawings using digital means now, which is great.
Worth noting in this conversation right now, if you're listening to this and you're not familiar with some of the names that Jason just brought forward, Howard Sutcliffe is a partner with his wife Bridget at Shim Sutcliffe, and they have constructed or designed some of the most magnificent homes here, and they speak all over.
Yeah,
they're incredible. So to be able to have that as like
well, Bridget was our second year instructor. She was the coordinator of the program back then, and she brought amazing people. Oh yeah, no, she's a professor at U of T, and we're still in contact. And I'm lucky. So for example, my partner, who I also went to architecture school with, Anita Matusevics, she's became, I guess, more of a graphic designer, even though she also went through the architecture program, did really well, and worked for a while at KPMB. But she worked at Bruce Mouse for many, many years. And our practice is kind of a hybrid of, architecture, graphic design, a lot of other sort of in between practices. I like to say we're makers more than anything else. Mm-hmm. Whatever you focus on, you put your time into, and you end up making things. But we designed a really beautiful book for Bridget and Howard for their Point William project, which I think the book was released a couple of years ago, and it's a decades long project that they had done for a great client, and the project itself is stunning and beautiful, right. And so it's so I still communicate with them. And
you mentioned John Schneer too, who for many years also involved with faculty at
John's an excellent. I just love when he calls me in to do guest crits and have done with him for a number of years now, and he's been also a great friend. I mean, John was both a formidable professor, teacher when we were kids, meaning that, you wanted always to impress him. It
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily so
That's what I've heard.
forgiving at the time, but then you realized actually that he was super forgiving and super nurturing and just a big brain, a lovely person, and a good friend. He was actually our best man at my wedding.
Oh, really?
All those years ago in Rome. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And,
And I say this because understanding again, if you're listening to this and you're not familiar with them, it's worth looking up who they were, because to be able to get some early stage development from such talented people is really critical to becoming good and honing in on your craft.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, your penmanship from early stage to after working with some people like that is likely to change.
Well, so I guess when you're confronted with great personalities, and I mentioned Bruce Kubar before.
I was going to go there
these
next.
people were such inspirations because they were great people, and they were super charismatic, and you wanted to impress them as a student in some way, but also you wanted to know them, and they were also knowable. Back in the day, the classes weren't that large.
Yeah.
We had a great lounge that we built at the architecture school at 230 College Street, and put a pool table in there and a great old Gadget machine that came from a train station that one of the graduating years, left the school, and we built a little bar around it and had fabulous TGIFs. And, then I find out that Bruce was, a pool shark.
That's how we paid for university.
Yeah, that's what I understood. And so, he got quite, involved with and impressed with the fact that we brought our gift. My graduating class bought this pool table for the lounge down there, the cafe, as we called it back in the day. And so you got to know these people, and they were great. And in many cases, they hired you out of school and gave you opportunities, and spent time and talked about, I guess, the craft of architecture, and there was never a lack of inspiration and of understanding. And that was one of the great parts of going to U of T, which is that the community of architects that were working, the quality was always very high here in Toronto. And so many of the professional, practitioners would come to teach at school, and you got the benefit of their knowledge, and that's how you grew. I mean, that's how architecture is a funny animal. You kind of learn how to draw, and then you kind of learn how an office represents and has certain conventions and ways of communicating, as well as how they design in some cases. And those are sometimes predicated on the individuals or the associates or the partners, or how they see things and how projects can develop. And it's also, built in history and the tradition of it. But the access to those characters gave us a great sense that, we too could be like that.
Yeah, the confidence.
And that they were willing to teach, willing to spend time.
Yeah.
Because it's really an osmosis of sorts as well,
So what was it, and at what stage that you established that you wanted to create your own studio?
Oh, yeah. I think when you're young, you think you're going to have your own office, and then you start working in practice and you think, well, that's impossible. How do you convince clients to have the confidence in you to do something? And then, one thing leads to another, or, it's really, it's like with anything, timing and luck and chance. And I had such a great start working a little bit with architecture firms here, but mostly freelancing. I was doing lots of, I'd be hired to draw because I knew how to draw, and I was kind of particular about my pen and Mylar, my tech pen and drawing skills back in the day, which quickly faded, like within a year or so of me doing sort of freelance drawing. Then, if you didn't know a software that would be able to, readily offer you three-dimensional and then later rendering images, that, that kind of faded quickly. But which is all to say that I kind of sensed that I would be able to, one day work on my own, and then gradually, someone gives you a commission of sorts. I was always interested in architecture that was small enough to be furniture, or furniture that was big enough to be a small architecture. And in that realm of, scale, you could find a client or a patron of some kind that would have faith in you to carry out something that was tangible or doable. If I knew always that if I could draw it and and I knew how to make it at a sort of cursory level from studying and working in carpentry, that the logic of what you could do could just grow and grow. And so and still today, many years later, I love micro architectures. I like the idea of this sort of movement towards resilient, small scale, not affordable, let's say attainable architecture, because we're also facing, as obvious to everyone in construction business, there's a housing crisis, and there needs to be some version of an affordable or an attainable housing model. And so these are things that I'm fascinated with and work in quite often, whether it's through my prefab and modular interests or through the timber work that I do. I do a lot of heavy timber work as well now.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because the modular work is interesting. I kind of feel like you were ahead of it in many ways, because there were not a whole lot of people that were contemplating the use of containers. Well, when I know that you had done a few. Yeah,
I mean, I'd say I was, the shipping container kind of came around in the 50s as an entity, as an idea, as a ITU, a transportation unit of storage. And I also, love storage as a concept. It's sort of critical to clean architecture, is to store your things. But so I did know about shipping container work, and I had a friend from childhood that wanted to sort of start up something that involved container buildings, and so I guess maybe around 2008 or 9 I got interested in it, which again, it's maybe early days in a way, but it certainly had been around for a long time. But it certainly became kind of popularized, let's say, in the decade or so around the time I was working on them. And we did do, we built buildings in China and America and sent them in some cases to Europe and South America, and took part in lots of different types of, buildings, from super small, single 10-foot container units to sort of multiple units that would sort of Lego together. I was always really super enamored of companies like Low Tech in New York. Big fan of theirs, and they're really the kind of the granddaddy and the ones who really kind of made container architecture and that version of prefab unbelievably successful, because they are artists and they are great architects, and they're super skilled, and their projects are dynamic and structurally challenging and beautiful, and they respond to great program requirements, whether it be housing or cool pop-up Puma shops and everything in between. So I look to the just like in architecture, you look to the great ones to gain inspiration and understanding, and then you try to do your best with each commission you have and the budgets and the circumstances. So, but we did lots of them.
Yeah. And you referenced before, and I know that you have a strong affinity for it, you mentioned mass timber and your love for it, but you referenced at the beginning of this conversation your father's love for it. And so do you find yourself enamored by it because of that at some level, or is it a subconscious thing? Or
for sure. I mean, so, and in addition to that, my brother, who's a great friend of mine, Dr. Reese, my brother Reese Halter, was a huge inspiration. I used to go, he studied out in the West Coast at UBC in the early days, and we would wander forests, and he was early days a forestry student, later a conservation biologist and ecologist, and got his PhD in root physiology, I guess, at the University of Melbourne. So he's in the
root physiology,
in the roots, I should say.
Cool.
Yeah. So a real scientist, doctor, and so we'd wander forests, and I'd be reciting Latin names of trees and stuff like that, and we just loved always the West Coast. Was so inspiring. So yes, out of my dad's love of tree planting in early days, because we had a big house and a big lot and planted few hundred trees over the course of a number of years when we were little kids, which seemed like a big deal because we were little guys and the trees weren't so little to us at the time. So the love of wood and love of timber, love of the West Coast, and of using, I suppose, in a way, to be a good steward of materials, because architects and designers use a lot of materials, and you have to kind of be responsible to the notion that these are limited resources, and that if we use them, we should use them well. And if we use them, maybe we should hopefully design them so that they stick around for a long time. And so using bigger timber for me was always, I was fascinated with it because I loved the appearance and the structural expression of big timber, but also it can also be reused and upcycled, I suppose, or changed, or after a building's lived out its life, if you've built it with big timber, you can take that and put it in another structure. And I don't know, that's maybe a one adaptive reuse outcome of it. But I also, from just an expressive level, you can cantilever and express the timber on the interior of a building. There's a sort of a biophilic resonance, right? We feel good when we sit around and absorb a visual environment where we see a lot of wood.
When design works in harmony with nature, you feel it. You feel it in the texture, in the light, even the water, touching your senses. That's what I love about Quanta pools. Their approach goes far beyond the traditional poured concrete pool. Using biodesign technology developed in Italy, Quanta creates sculpted pools that blend with the land instead of competing with it. Their materials are engineered to expand up to 300 times per foot, allowing each form to move with the ground rather than against it. The result is a natural, tactile surface that feels like part of the landscape, soft underfoot, warm to the touch, and visually integrated with its surroundings. Whether you want a classic poured concrete structure or a fully biodesigned pool, a Quanta can include any water system you prefer. Salt water, chlorine, bromine, or UV, all designed for performance and longevity. They're committed to clear timelines, precision installation, and ongoing service after completion. If you're looking for something that feels truly custom, a pool that connects architecture and nature, reach out to me. It's Jonathan at jonathan@waldenhomes.ca, and I'll connect you with Yuri and his team at Aquanta. Now, let's go back to Jason. Yeah, so I actually have a question that in advance of speaking with you, I thought I would reach out to some people that know you. And I wanted to get a question from one of them. And so I believe you know the gentleman from Great Lake Studio. So Rick G.
Yep.
Ricky G's got a question for you.
Okay. Cool.
And I'm gonna ask it.
Okay.
So Rick wanted to know, given your love of mass timber, what are your top 5 favorite tree types and why?
That's awesome.
I thought you would enjoy this.
Yeah. No, that's
you can absorb for a second. There's an enjoyment to this,
Oh no, I mean, the brain just explodes. That's such a good question. And maybe not even necessarily, the first one I would say, not even necessarily because because I don't think you use them necessarily for construction, but the bristlecone pine from the White Mountains in California are the great granddaddies of our planet. I think they're some of the oldest trees in existence. They managed to avoid the ice age because of their location in the White Mountains just below the Sierras in the desert, but up high enough that they throve, and they didn't have any active pathogens that affected them. So they just have lasted forever. And so when you visit the space of this kind of it's like a hallowed cathedral of this mountaintop area that have these trees there, and you witness, what could be a 10,000-year-old tree that still managed to push out growth in this super short season that allows a tiny bit of green to extend itself with each passing year. It's awesome because you feel like you understand what time could be through those trees. On the other side, in the Sierra Mountains, my brother and I would go and hike around the grand sequoias, and the sequoias are epic trees. There's like the circumference or the diameter, I guess, of these things are massive, the ones that are still existing and up there. And that's another level of enormity and beauty. So the sequoias are remarkable. The redwoods are another amazing species, like amazing. They grow so incredibly tall. And we've been to Prairie Creek innumerable times, my brother and I, to wander around and marvel at what remains in these, enormous stands.
Mm-hmm.
So those are three trees. But, I love Douglas fir. I love the strength of the wood. I love the grain of the wood. Douglas fir plywood has always been my favorite texture and finish and on a surface for any interior, because I have a limited capacity and I do the same thing again and again, like some kind of possessed maker that wants to try and make a box 1,000 different ways. But so I love Douglas fir. I love Western red cedar. So, back to fir for a second, its tensile capability, its color, the way it cuts, the way it smells, the way that it tools. It's the hardest of the softwoods, but it's still a softwood and a conifer, and yet it's beautiful in nature. So in its natural setting, it's stunning. The needles themselves are kind of a softer kind of needle, and it's really beautiful, and the way that they grow is beautiful. And this, the scent of the fir sap is like tangerine or something. It's heavenly. It's beautiful. Red cedar is an amazing wood. And I have a colleague, Clat Bai, who's a extraordinary carver, West Coast. He's a friend. We're discussing the idea that we would work together on some things, but I admire his work enormously, and he makes most of his stuff out of big chunks of Western red cedar that they still are managing to carefully remove for the purpose of this sort of hallowed art form that he takes part in.
Mm-hmm.
And cedar is, of course, the most beautiful smelling wood, and it's got this natural preservative called thuyaplicin in it that makes it resistant to pathogens and bugs and this sort of thing. And that's what gives off the great smell. And that's what makes it age really well after it's been, cut and milled and put into place. There's so many more woods from the east here. I love the pine. The white pine here in the east is a beautiful shaped tree up in the Canadian Shield, where it sort of cohabitates with all the other amazing species up there. They look different. They're majestic. It reminds me of, Group of Seven paintings, and just the sort of the sweeping boughs are evidence of its sort of structural kind of qualities,
I got to tell you, this past weekend, I just did a backcountry canoe trip, which also, I know Rick, who asked this question, is like massively into doing these off-grid canoe trips.
Oh yeah, nice. Beauty. Where did you go?
They just went back to Wabakini in Northern Ontario for the second year in a row with Maggie and their son and their dog.
Yeah.
And they were gone for a couple weeks. But I say this because I know that he has an appreciation for what that is in nature.
Yeah.
And having been in Algonquin this past weekend, I have these pictures where you have this beautiful, majestic landscape, and you have this one tree every couple 100 feet that's letting all the others know I've been here longer than you.
Yeah. That's really well said. Yeah.
And just like looking over everyone else to make sure that everyone else out there is okay.
Yeah. They're all communicating too, you know, they are, I'm sure. Yeah.
And it is just because you bring up the white pines. And when we're done this, I'll show you some of those pictures, but the feeling of being surrounded by those trees instead of the metropolis of the city is a really, really humbling feeling.
There's something about being in nature that hones everyone out, and your blood pressure chills, and you calm yourself, and you're around power, right? Like it's
my resting heart rate. This is crazy that I will know this because I like athletics.
Yeah.
My resting heart rate on that trip was the lowest that it had been in a year. I was going to sleep, and my resting heart rate while I was out there was at 42. And traditionally,
Yeah.
it's like average at like 47. But I was like
Yeah.
5 points lower being surrounded that because you've got all this beautiful oxygen to breathe.
That's right. Yeah.
You're just, your
Well,
body's at peace.
I mean, that's the miracle of all miracles, right? Trees make oxygen. What else makes oxygen?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, plankton and the oceans do as well. But I mean, it's our giver, right? It's the life giver. I'm really, you know, and I mean this in a profound way, not to sound a little bit too out there, but I believe in the energy of obviously in nature, but I also believe that trees do possess energy. They have character. They have a kind of a relational association with us. And so, you know, got to give reverence to it. And as I say, as a maker and a architectural designer, you know, I use a lot of materials. So I really have to think about it. I do meditate on it. I do give it considerable thought because, you know, we are able to sit in these beautiful wood crafted pieces that we're now in, thanks to nature and thanks to the trees. Like I really, you know, it's something. It's not for naught.
Some of my favorite battle sequences that have ever existed in film,
right,
was in Lord of the Rings,
right,
when the trees
the
finally joined.
Yeah, that was a great moment, and I love that. I love that.
Oh.
I love Tolkien, but I love the idea that there was this ancient stand of trees that were
we don't get involved in this,
right? Which is true. They didn't want anything to do with
it. Then they're brought into the fight.
Right.
We just went from talking about this like beautiful poetic concept of being able to sleep to talking about a fantastical movie.
No, listen, Lord of the Rings is like, you know, next level.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'll try to bring it back.
Yeah, right. I don't know. Do we have to? I want to talk about trees for the rest of the day.
Right? I mean, well, look, I mean, I think one of the major differences also between the way that we construct here versus what you'll see a lot of in Europe is like, you know, in Europe, there's a lot of concrete in their forming, right? Mm-hmm. And in construction, whereas here there's a lot of stick framing, you know, similar to Japan.
Yeah.
If only we could if we could implement some of the beautiful techniques that the Japanese do.
That's another, I mean, so that's a great segue to, you know, craft and appreciation for construction techniques.
Yeah.
You know, I know early days I was certainly impressed by Frank Lloyd Wright's work because that was what was kind of available to us in terms of what, you know, to understand architecture at that, wherever I was at that stage. And Wright drew from a great tradition that observed, you know, this extraordinary, you know, Japanese measure of craft and custom fitting and, you know, just the approach to working with wood and how, again, there's a sort of a traditional, I'm a very big fan of, you know, vernacular architectures and wherever architecture comes from. And you're right, you know, different parts of the world build with different materials, usually by virtue of what's available to them. And, you know, materials do come and go. The Mediterranean was once filled with these amazing cedro libani, the cedars of Lebanon, that ended up being, you know, kind of tapped out for all the ships that were built in the Mediterranean. And, you know, but back then they built tons and tons of wood structures. Japan has always been a kind of a land of both many trees. They import a lot of stuff from the rest of the world now too, but they have a respect and a measure of craft and approach to making, which has to be part of every designer's knowledge base, because it's such a incredible way of just dealing with materials and you know, and giving praise or homage to the character of the material you're working with, which is, you know, if you bring a measure of craft to an extraordinary material and do something that matches, you know, it always elevates it to another level. So.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about honesty and structure, about showing the parts that hold a building together, it's impossible not to think of Henry Rotberg Steel, at least for us. They've been supplying our projects at Walden Homes for over a decade, and they're a part of what makes the kind of work Jason and I are discussing possible. They're a third-generation family business here in Toronto. People who care deeply about getting every detail right, whether it's rebar, posts, beams, shims, or full structural systems with hundreds of individual steel pieces. Their work shows up clean, precise, and on time. Their shop drawings are excellent, their pricing is fair, and their service is consistent, which is rare. On this project, they provided the long black painted beams that run through the main space. You can find it actually on our Instagram page at Walden Homes. Elements that could be seen as eyesores become features. That's what happens when steel is detailed and delivered by people who understand its role in both structure and design. We rely on Henry Ropberg Steel for projects across every scale. From single beams to full steel packages, they've never let us down. It's good, honest work from good people. If you want to learn more, email me. Jonathan, Jonathan, waldenhomes.ca, and let's get you connected to their fantastic team. But for now, let's get back for the conclusion of my discussion with Jason. So, I guess now taking in the appreciation you have for mass timber, but also for, it's funny, you said before that you're a maker, and I was actually thinking this entire time about a different adjective that I feel like you're like, trying to think of the right way of framing this, what the term is, but not quite a producer, but like a production manager.
Yeah, man. I'll take that.
And I say it because in talking to you over the last number of years, but also, really getting into some of these conversations today, I find that you really enjoy the production.
Oh, it's crucial. Yeah. I mean, that's, I think what was so fun working with you on our recent build in Caledon, because, you and your amazing company.
I should.
Yeah. Can I plug them? Can I?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's Danny and Bruce. They own it.
Yeah.
I'm there to help run it, and we have some great guys on site.
Walden are extraordinary team, and the subs and all the people that you hire and work with are really great. And my approach to work is that, I start with design and work with the client. I'm always collaborating. I always feel that the client gives tons of information if you're willing to incorporate and work that through. And then when we get together with a team like yours and the subs, there's so much to learn on every project. I mean, you do bring a measure of knowledge over time to how you do what you do, and everyone does it a little bit differently. And I'm, constantly trying to, make a better mousetrap in a sense with my limited, means, but I grow so much with each project, trying to ask how things are done, trying to figure out how to integrate knowledge from whether it's a, millworking company to a mechanical company to, whatever the product is, or whether it's the mason or whomever who, bring decades of experience to bear. And, if we don't ask questions of them, I'm not going to grow my knowledge base either. Mm-hmm. And so I do really enjoy, getting both info from them, but also understanding how a project flow works. How do you make a building better? How do you sequence it better? How do you organize things better? What's more efficient? I mean, partly there's material efficiencies, and then there's labor efficiencies, and there's, also ways of doing things that just change and grow over time. And, with each passing year, we're finding, there's, improvements or innovations on everything from material fasteners to mechanical equipment to better, more, let's say sustainable but resilient practitioners, or resilient, let's say, products that come from companies that care about not just the natural resource, but of the quality of the living spaces that we end up in as a result of, observing and growing and implementing those efficiencies.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And that it also speaks to my, knowledge of filmmaking or bookmaking or just working with different creatives and different practices. You're always You're always good if you can delegate. One, you're two. I don't
If you know how to, if you know how to delegate.
Listen, if you don't know how to do everything, you better know how to delegate, right? So there's that, and then and then the sense that every project is made up of a team,
yes.
and that we're all components, right?
Yeah,
and that's the fact of the matter. Architecture is as I said earlier, it's sort of complex in the sense that there's many moving parts, many things from, that go beyond client and architect or architectural designer relationships and regulatory frameworks and contracting and executing and finishing. And then, as we talked about as well, operations, maintenance, and how to keep a building alive, right? You build, like, a building is weathering from the day it's built, and it needs attention, needs maintenance, needs love. I mean, we try and build a building that's going to be sufficient enough,
mm-hmm.
but the sun and the water will erode over time.
I mean, we are currently sitting on a planet, in a room on a planet that's moving at 66,000 miles per hour. So.
Yeah, it's going pretty fast. I know.
Just, things are going to happen here that are a little bit more than what we had bargained for sometimes,
That's right.
There are going to be some floods, there's probably going to be some fires. Like,
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, and more, right? As the climate stability sort of changes and we're faced with increasing, wild weather circumstances, we kind of need to build more, not responsibly, but more robustly.
Yeah. Actually, one of the interesting things that I learned from someone else I had spoken to, and a different form of appreciation I have for a product that was spec'd on the project that we worked on. Mm-hmm. Our client really wanted a standing seam metal roof,
mm-hmm.
and we're all saying, like, it's beautiful, but, like, do you need it based on the slope?
Sure.
And what I recently came across in a discussion with someone else was, based on location of that project, if God forbid there was a forest fire,
yep,
that roof could potentially help save a portion of that building.
Oh, definitely.
So if you're out there and you're ever speccing roofs with your client, and you're living in anywhere near forest, and a lot of Toronto is surrounded by ravines.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in LA and what has happened in other cities is likely to happen at some stage in other cities. So,
yeah, I mean, it could.
Spec standing steam. Yes.
Well, so I was talking with a great buddy of mine, Stefano Pugliati, is an Italian architect, and he's got a great firm. He's in Torino and in Pordenone in Italy, and he's also got a practice here. He works with some great teammates here, and we were talking about this with the idea of, I guess, specifying or imagining a better architecture for rebuilding cities like Los Angeles, and the kind of the fireproof, waterproof, seismic proof requirements that are upon us. Why not do that? I mean, it's interesting in neighborhoods in LA, as I understand it, because I haven't been there since the fires, but the buildings that did make it through, in some cases, were both metal roofed and resilient sided structures that just somehow managed to withstand fire, whereas all the other houses
on both sides.
Yeah.
So there's actually this photo I remember. I can't remember who the architect was, but this home where literally everything around it had burned,
mm-hmm.
and this specific home was designed for well beyond code compliance.
Yeah, it may have been. I think I saw that. I'm not sure if it was a net zero house or what it was.
Yeah,
or in Palisades,
and it had really, really small, but it was like 3 or 4 foot high concrete. It wasn't a fence. It was more like retaining walls.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it didn't need retaining walls.
Yeah.
Around the entire property with
like
really low
beams or something.
Yeah, with really low shrubs.
Yep.
Specifically so that nothing around it could catch, and if fire ever came, that it wouldn't be able to hop a fence.
And
it was the only house that stood.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
like Look, one of the reasons why I have so much joy in doing this podcast is being able to learn from so many incredible people like yourself.
No, thanks. Yeah, well,
about how you can build a better world. And the product knowledge, even though you talk about, trying to build the same box in many different ways, using the same types of materials, it's a hard thing to do. But when you learn about them, people speccing Ipe out there, why are you speccing Ipe? Right? There are enough other woods that you can spec that aren't going to completely destroy a rainforest.
Well, so fair enough. And
I'm not saying you, by the way, I'm saying in general.
Well, interestingly, I haven't used Ipe in years and years.
Right.
Not because I'm partly because if you become aware of the distances that materials travel, and you want to practice in a responsible manner, well, maybe the rock that comes from Owen Sound is a really good one as opposed to a marble from elsewhere. Not that marbles aren't the most beautiful, premium, lovely materials possible. Same thing goes with wood products. We have a pretty wide variety. Now we don't have like oily, rich woods like Ipe or mahogany or some of the extraordinary woods that I've come across in the years from places far and wide.
Yeah.
And they do have awesome characteristics in terms of performance, but we can also use local products and treat them in better ways and maintain them over time. And then we're trying to shrink that footprint, I guess, is the idea, so that we're returning to some traditional methodology or mindset where we, let's use things from around here before we go elsewhere to bring other things in. And of course, the diminishing resource of rainforests is critical, because as we talked about, they give us life and oxygen and sustain tons of species that many of which we don't even yet know, and tons that are just trying to survive. I'm very aware and cognizant and sensitive to the idea of all facets of nature. So animals, plants, and the whole natural world that's left is something that we somehow have to protect, while at the same time can I use in some of our projects in terms of the materiality. So
use it and then plant it again. I have a couple last questions to ask.
Sure.
We've spoken a lot about your life through the course of early years and professional years. We haven't delved deep into anything about what you like to do with your free time. And so what do you like to do? Because, we were looking at some guitars that I have here.
Yeah.
So what is it that you like to do to take your mind off of all the other stuff that's going on?
I'm sort of a creature of my own practice, I guess. What I do is what I like to do. So, my business is oftentimes related to my hobbies. I'm been restoring a barn for the past couple of years of a friend of mine, really great guy, out in Grafton, Ontario, a little past Coburg, to the east a bit. So that was an amazing restoration, because the barn itself, it's an old cannery building. So in fact, it's not really a barn, it's more of a warehouse that would have been made out of the hemlock that would have been available at the time 100 years ago or thereabouts. And the building was in sort of a substantial state of disrepair. The roof was sort of caving in because of a lack of proper I guess the metal had been peeled off of it in part. And so we came in, and with a barn restorer friend of mine, started using a bunch of ash from his stand. He has a forest near Lake Simcoe that was affected by the beetle, and the ash was a lot of standing ash had died. So he was milling it as quickly as he could in order to get the good wood. And so we started putting it into this barn, and then we restored floors and windows and walls and roof and brought this, building back to now, something that'll, I guess, last for another 100 years. Amazing. So that's a sort of a casual thing to do. My kids are grown up now. They're grown up as in 22 and 21 now. I spent a lot of time with them when I was younger. I was, a hockey coach. I played hockey for many years and loved it. And then when my son came up, I started coaching him with North Toronto, and that was a great passion for me, a great thing to take part in, skate with my son, but also something that I could enjoy and do for those years. And that's been, almost 10 years ago now, I guess. Okay. But it was a big chunk of the young life of the family and spending time both with my son and daughter. I still spend lots of time with my daughter these days. She's going to school in Italy, in Florence. And so I'm back to Florence, where I was living and teaching for some years back then. And I spent a lot of time there.
Circular.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, life is poetry in some ways, right? So I'm very fortunate to do that. So, trying to stay both in touch with the kids as they grow up. That's a sort of conscious effort. I wouldn't call it a hobby, but but I draw lots of things on my free time that are just my own projects, buildings, furniture, objects. The work is practice is my hobby, I guess.
Cool. Jason, it has been a pleasure chatting with you. I'm happy to know you.
Thanks, man.
I'm happy to have had this conversation. It is stuff that some of it you and I have spoken about before, but definitely enlightening. I learned a lot from you today, so I thank you for sitting across from me and being as open as you have been.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate it, John.